Hello and welcome to another episode of James Dean Designs, where today we are installing the linear rail upgrade kit on the FoxAlien XE-Pro. Essentially what we're about to do is replace the wheels that run the axis on both the X and Y axis with linear rails to hopefully improve the performance of the machine. Now at this point I'd normally do a section about following the official instructions. However, I've been through the official instructions and I actually think there's a few too many steps in there that overcomplicate it. So basically I'm going to be doing it my way, which is probably about 70% aligned to the official instructions, but hopefully it should save you a few steps when you come to do the upgrade. Most of the bolts that we are going to be taking out we will need to reuse in exactly the same place. So essentially every time you take a bolt out or take a part off, put the bolts back in their original hole with the washers, just give them a few turns to keep them tight and safe and make sure you don't lose them. So do remember that as we go through the video. But ultimately, let's dive in, get the wiring and drag chain disassembled and start with this upgrade. The first thing we're about to do is to start disconnecting the wiring. Now obviously I've left all of the tags on that were originally. If you don't have these, you may just want to put some indication as to what cables you are disassembling. But basically we're going to go around and get all these disconnected. Start with the limit switches, just press them down, pull them apart. Same for the X and the Z, pull those apart. When it comes to the stepper motors, ideally use something like an electrical screwdriver just to push them up from underneath. Don't pull on the wires itself. So just come in with the electrical screwdriver, pop that out and they should come out fairly easy. Same with the second one as well. And then once that comes out we can start to take this off the bracket itself. So I'm just going to come in and start to remove the original bolts holding this in place. Now do remember what I said a couple of seconds ago. Every time you take bolts out, put them back in their original position just to make sure they are kept safe. And that is exactly what we are going to do here. So we're going to take the two out holding the drag chain and we're going to come back in and put them in place. These ones are a little bit fiddly as we can clearly see on camera. But once they are out, put them back in. Obviously clean any sawdust up like I have here because I've clearly been using the machine. Just a couple of turns, make sure they are held in place and then we can move on. Now at this stage you could technically take the two bolts out holding the drag chain on, but actually an easier step is we've got to remove the bracket holding this in place anyway. So let's just take the two bolts off holding the entire metal strip rather than taking the drag chain off, and it just cuts out one step. So we'll do that, remove bolt one side and obviously remove the bolt the other side as well, and then as we said earlier, return them to their original positions once it's out the way. What I would also strongly suggest at this point is, because we now do have access to the back of your machine, if you have been using it and it is dirty like mine is, go ahead and get that cleaned up. It will make life easier later on. Same principle with the wires on the X motor, just come in, prise them off very gently, making sure not to tug the wires. Get both of those out nice and easily, and again disconnect the limit switch. And remove the two bolts underneath holding the drag chain bracket in place. Now I'm just quickly jumping in here. The next stage I'm about to do is disconnecting the drag chain and cables from the back of the machine. But upon reflection, actually, you don't need to do this. I did it because it makes my life easier when spinning the machine round, especially for filming. But actually, it's one less step you can technically cut out. However, you may still want to do it, as I say, just to keep all the wiring out of the way. And the same again with the Y1 motor. Again, just come in, remove the cables nice and gently, making sure not to tug them. Remove both of them out. And we're also going to remove the drag chain right here. Now you don't technically need to do this on the other side, so we're just going to pull these two bolts out of the way to make sure the drag chain is free. Again, these are the little fiddly ones, so do be careful when taking them out. At this point we are essentially just going to take all of the wiring and push it over to one side where the control box is. Remove the Z carriage. There are 4 bolts holding this in place, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. Obviously there is weight in this carriage, so do be careful as you start to release these off, as it will obviously have a tendency to drop. So just be very careful. You can always add something underneath this to support it if you are worried about it falling. So with that disconnected, we are just going to put it to one side. Obviously, if you wanted to reduce the weight before taking it off, you could take the router or spindle out to begin with. And again, once that has been taken out and put to one side, put the bolts back in their holes as we have done previously. Now when it comes to the X-axis gantry, there are 6 bolts holding each plate on either side. So take all of those 6 bolts out so we can take the X-axis off, and again replace the bolts as soon as we've done so. So with all of the bolts out, we can now take the X-axis off and simply just take this off and place it to the back. And again, just put all the bolts back in their original holes for safekeeping. Remove the 2 dust guards from either side and put the bolts back in place just for safekeeping again. Now at this stage we're about to start dismantling the carriage. We're going to take the 4 bolts out holding it to the ball screw. We're going to take the spacer bars out, and we're also going to take the wheels off, and this should allow then the entire carriage to drop out from underneath the machine. So with the bolts and the spacers out, we're going to come in and now remove the wheels. And there we are. Now I should say, if you are struggling to take these wheels off, you can release the eccentric nuts on the other side, but ultimately this now frees the carriage up to drop down, and we can take it off by lifting the machine up, sliding it out from underneath. I'm going to undo the opposite side first, do exactly the same, then we can take both carriages out of the way. At this point now we can simply lift the machine up and take the carriages out from underneath. We no longer need these 2 plates, however we do need the limit switches off them, and I just put the bolts back in there obviously for safekeeping. So for the moment just put these to one side and we can take the parts off that we need very shortly. If your machine is brand new, don't worry about this next step, but if you have previously used it, just make sure you clean down all of the rails, that there's no debris left on top, and obviously also clean the inside of here and just give it a bit of maintenance and make sure everything is tidy. In the upgrade kit there are 4 linear rails. We need 2 at the moment, 1 to sit on either side of the y-axis. So we're going to get these unpacked, take a closer look on top of the y-axis, and we'll see about getting them fitted. Be careful when you unpack these. Normally linear rails have little stoppers on the end to save the units running straight off, but these do not, and they will easily fall off the end. As I show you, all you have to do is pick them up and they will slide. So yeah, be very careful to make sure they don't slip off the end of the rail. As well as the linear rails, you're also going to need the M4 12mm bolts. There should be a pack of 60 in with your kit. So we're going to bring one of the linear rails in, sit it on top of here against this straight edge, and just make sure that it is sitting against that nice and comfortably. Also look through the holes on top of the linear rails to make sure they're aligned with the holes below. We're then just going to bring in one of the bolts and put it in one end, give it a couple of turns till it starts to bite. Then we're just going to drop one in the other end as well, just to start to hold this in position. Now what I have done is I've just tightened them up and then pulled them back off a quarter of a turn. Now the reason for this is we need to check that everything runs smooth very shortly. So I'm going to go ahead now and put the other remaining bolts in place. Next you're going to need the mounting plates for them. These are the L-shaped ones. There are 2 of them and they can go either way, so don't worry about which way around they go. You will also need the M4 10mm bolts, which come in a separate package. There should also be a white piece of plastic in your kit as well, around 1 millimeter thick. Now I don't have one in mine, so I've just got a few post-it notes stuck together to around the same thickness. I'm just going to stick this to the bottom of that, making sure there's a bit hanging out. Ultimately it's just a spacer to act against this solid panel here, so it's not rubbing up it initially whilst we get it mounted. Now place it on top of one of the runners, line up the holes, and then bring in the M4 10mm bolts and just start to get those in place. Now as always, we want to get them just pinched up and not overly tight, because we've still got another 2 to get in. So we'll bring in a couple of extra bolts to the other side. I'm going to push this in until I can see the holes, and then again drop those in place and start to tighten those up. So with those in place now, we can pinch them all up. And I can also remove the sticky notes as the spacer from underneath, just give them a bit of a tug and they'll come out. I've rotated the base around. I'm now going to put the linear rail on the opposite side and again fix the mounting plate so it's the same as this one over here. Next you're going to need one of these plates. They are universal again, they can go both ways, and also the M5 12mm bolts. We're just going to place this plate underneath and drop one of the bolts in from the top. Now arguably this could have been done before we even mounted the plate onto the side, so you can think of that option as well. But we're just going to pinch that up, bring another bolt in and get the other 2 in place now. Now earlier on we took 4 of these bolts off, M4 12mm bolts with a spring washer and a flat washer. It's time for these to go back in and hold it back in place on the ball screw mounting block. And with that one done, we're going to do exactly the same now, obviously, but on the opposite side. We then replicate the same process on the opposite side to get this one built up as well. The next step is to transfer the limit switches from the old plate to the new plate where they will sit right here. So we're just going to do that really quickly right now. Take out the bolts and move them over. If not done so already, we now need to disassemble the carriage on the X axis. We're going to take all this apart, but all the parts remaining on the back plate, such as the limit switches and the bracket, they can remain in place. So let's get this taken apart now. So that's everything separated that we need to get done. We can put those 2 plates to one side for the moment. What I'm simply going to do now is clean up this gantry, make sure we get rid of all of the dust, and then install the linear rails in a similar way that we did on both the top and bottom for this axis. We'll start with the linear rail on top first. We're just going to bring that in and do exactly as we did earlier. Line it up against the ridge, make sure that is sitting flush, make sure the holes line up nice and close. Bring in the M4 12mm bolts. Don't drop them obviously. Place one at the start, one at the end, just pinch those up briefly. Making sure to hold it in place against that ridge. And again, just remember what I said earlier, you don't want to tighten these, you want to leave them almost just pinching it in place, but it may allow for a little bit of movement later on in case we need to align the rail. Then go through and just put the bolts in the rest of the remaining holes. With that one done, we're going to flip it over and do exactly the same thing. We can now start to rebuild the carriage up. You will have a couple of new small plates that look like this. We're just going to start by putting them on the underneath one. So there are a couple of different holes on this. Ultimately, where you've got holes on the front there, they should be pointing towards the side where you've got the writing on the XE-Pro. So I'm just going to place that there for now. We're going to bring in the M4 10mm bolts that we have already used. And just again, line these up with the little carriages on the linear rail and start to get those in place. Next we're going to reattach the front plate, and we'll need a few of the M4 12mm bolts to do this. Just rest that there for a second. We'll come in, get one bolt in place, and then follow with the others. Obviously I did just jack it up slightly with a piece of wood to save the plate hitting the bed of the machine. We'll then spin it round and do the same with the other plate on the back. Bring the plate in, and again, same bolts, just place these in. Obviously they're coming from the other side at the moment. And begin to tighten those up. With that tightened up, we can now bring in the 4 bolts that we took out from holding it into the ball screw carriage earlier on. And we can align those up with the piece underneath. Just drop those in place and again, tighten them up. And with that tightened up, we can now flip this back up on top and get the last plate in place. And then finish it off with the M4 10mm bolts to fix it back to the linear rail. Now what you can just see over there is I've connected one Y motor up, and all we're simply going to do is jog this about a little bit back and forth to see how it runs and make sure it is smooth. That seems to be running smooth, so what I'm simply now going to do is take it from one end to the other and just run it completely, and then tighten up all the bolts on that side. I'm now going to disconnect that motor, connect the other one up and run the exact same process on that side. Reinstall the 2 dust guards. We are about to reattach the X axis to the Y axis, but first do just double check your carriages in exactly the same position. 54 millimeters, 54 millimeters. So I am good to go. We'll pick this up and drop it in. Now obviously we kept all of the bolts from earlier, so we're going to take these out and put them back in place, holding this in nice and securely. And with this side done, we'll now do exactly the same on the opposite side. Now at this stage you've got two choices. You can either continue and rebuild everything, or what I'm going to do at this phase is I've just connected the wires up to the X-axis motor, and I'm just going to test this runs all smooth like it did earlier. So I'm just going to jog it about a little bit. That all seems to be running fine. So we're going to do exactly the same as we did earlier. Start one end, jog it all the way to the other end, and tighten up all the bolts on the top and the bottom for the linear rails. So that is pretty much the upgrade actually now complete. Everything has been ran and checked. All we need to do is put the Z assembly back in place, and then obviously get the drag chain and wiring back in place, which I'll get that done now. So with the linear rails installed, the drag chain and cabling all put back in place, do a final test and just jog the machine around, make sure everything runs nice and smooth. So that all ran nice and smooth, and I can promise you nothing was adjusted off screen. Everything has just gone together very smoothly. Now if you do jog your machine around and find there are sticky spots, you'll often hear them. The tone of it will change as it moves about round. Then you may just need to release the rails or sometimes the plates and let it settle in and find its natural comfortable spot in terms of the rail alignment, and then obviously tighten everything back up. But once everything has been tightened, you can come in with these little green caps that come in the packet, and they just simply pop right back on top of the bolt holes, and it saves dust getting in there, obviously keeping it nice and clean and nice and smooth. Now the final thing that I will mention, if like me you had already trammed your machine in and done a spoil board, you will need to do this again. Technically everything that we have just installed has potentially thrown the kilter of the axis out slightly. So ultimately I do need to retram this in and probably resurface the spoil board to make sure it's all smooth. But that is literally everything done with the upgrade kit, and we're good to move forward. So one or two bits may have looked slightly fiddly, but ultimately that's because I'm trying to do it in a small area in front of the camera, which always makes it more difficult. But genuinely, that was a very easy installation for this machine, especially to get linear rails on a CNC machine. Now, obviously, I just mentioned about tramming this in. If you've never trammed it in before, check out the link in the corner to the spoil board and tramming video for this machine. It is well worth it for the time that it takes, and ultimately you will get better results from your machine. Now, the final thing I need to mention before wrapping up is linear rails, like any other type of hardware, they require maintenance. So make sure they are kept clean, make sure debris is kept off them, but you will need to re-grease them over time. Now I'll be doing a video on this in the future, but ultimately if you want the information now, then head to Google and you'll find tons of information on how to look after linear rails. Now if you are interested in this machine or the linear rail upgrade kit, check out the affiliate links in the description area below. They will always take you to the best available prices for all of this equipment. Thank you very much for watching. If you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe if not done so already. And final thanks as always goes to my patrons. I appreciate all the support I get from you. See you all on the next episode.